evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, as Southeast Asian leaders gather here in KL for the 46th ASEAN Summit, activists and civil society groups have also convened in KL for the ASEAN Peoples Forum, calling for democracy, rights and political accountability to be part of the regional conversation. So joining me on the show today are three guests who are in town for the forum. Brizza Rosales, who is the Executive Director of the Asian Network for Free Elections, known as ANFREL. We have Cornelius Damar Hanung, who is the East Asia and ASEAN Program Manager at the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development, known as Forum Asia, and Alexa Yadao, who is a Junior Project Officer for Electoral Reforms at the Legal Network for Truthful Elections, known as LENTE, based in the Philippines. Welcome to the show. Together, we're going to be exploring the state of democracy in Southeast Asia and where it's headed. Thank you for taking time to speak with me on the show today. I appreciate it. It's a big topic to cover. So I'm going to get kind of an overview from you. Let's start big picture. Brizza, may I begin with you? How would you characterize the state of democracy in Southeast Asia today? Are we on a decline? Are we stagnating? How would you characterize it?
That's a big question also. But probably I'll start since 2024 was a super election year, right? So at least for the Southeast Asia, we are still below the global average when it comes to when we're talking about representation, rule of law, and rights. So it's something that we are still below the global average. But there are still some hopes because we've seen more free elections, more credible elections, at least from two of the countries coming from the Southeast Asia. But at the same time, there are also declining democracy. Okay. So we've seen that in Myanmar, Cambodia. So it's something that it's really sensitive right now. And the international community and even the environment is very volatile. So it's something that we are also focusing as a regional election monitoring network.
So you're seeing some progress in some areas and decline in others. So not quite in level playing field, or everyone's not quite equal in that respect.
Yes.
Okay. Do you share the same sentiment, Hanung?
I think I share the same sentiment as well. But in terms of democracy, I would like to add that we need to also think about the right to participations of all people, and we need to also think from the most marginal one and then those who work with them, particularly human rights defenders. As Forum Asia works together with the human rights defenders, we have seen a very worrying decline of democracy. That in the past 2 years, we have documented at least 400 events of human rights violations against human rights defenders, and among of them are also pro-democracy defenders who try to be critical against the governments. And this has been done by the implementations of restrictive laws, that is also targeting defenders, journalists as well, covering governments, covering protests. And it's actually quite worrying because we see similar tactics are being implemented in one country to another in ASEAN level.
Okay,
as well.
Similar tactics, is it? Learning from each other, that tells me. Yeah, okay.
Not a good
That's not a good thing to learn from each other. Alexa, what about you? How would you characterize big picture state of democracy in recent years? Coming from the Philippines, just fresh from elections. Yes.
Yeah. So we just had our elections. It's a midterm election in the Philippines just 2 weeks ago. So it's we sometimes call our midterm elections in the Philippines a referendum on the current administration. So how well administration-backed candidates perform in midterm elections really talk about how satisfied Filipinos are with the current state. So there's a consensus that it was a dismal performance, at least for current administration, and but at the same time that also tells you how elections are functioning how it should. Like elections are a way to hold, it's a voice for Filipinos or for the constituency, how they could express what they don't like about the government. So we always say that during elections, it's the only time where Filipinos are equal because you have one vote. Everyone's one vote. Okay. So I think that's it. And in terms of electoral integrity, our election management body in the Philippines has pioneered some good innovations that hopefully we could touch on later, and so other Southeast Asian countries can learn from as well.
Okay, so these are the good things to learn from
the good things.
Yeah, from all the countries. I want to talk to you about something that almost every ASEAN country is grappling with, which is the manipulation of social media, of repressive cyber laws, of online censorship used to stifle dissent. And I looked to you, Danung, because you also talked a little bit about Hanung, because you talked a bit about using this against human rights defenders. Talk to me about the observations of how these, you call it digital authoritarianism, right? How would that reshape civic space, political life, public discourse around ASEAN? I'm sure you've been watching this as part of your collective work. May I begin with you, Brizza?
Yeah, okay. Actually, it's really a big chunk of what we do. Since looking at disinformation or digital authoritarianism, we have seen different patterns. So it's either you look at a country using transparency approaches. So they are tapping election management bodies, different government agencies, and civil society organizations to collaborate together in order to combat this problem. But there are also cases wherein you are criminalizing fake news. You are criminalizing the persons who are, they're just expressing dissent, or you stifle criticism. So it's something that you are using it as a tactic to silence the different civil society organization, and somehow it's also a tactic to shrink the civic spaces. So that's what's happening with regard to the pattern, at least for Southeast Asia. But we are also seeing a lot of efforts when it comes to, at least for elections, to combat this kind of disinformation. We are seeing the efforts of election management body. We have seen that since we observed the Indonesia elections last February 2024.
Working?
Somehow,
okay,
it's working.
So the efforts are showing some results. Okay.
Yeah. And you are seeing also efforts coming from the social media platforms. You are seeing a lot of fact-checking organizations, pre-banking and debunking efforts, and at the same time, the interagency approach is working.
Okay.
So that's one of the most important aspects that we are also highlighting from the past 2 days, since our cluster was talking about democracy and political rights. So we are harnessing each other's expertise to at least collaborate more and provide technical expertise, because that's where it is needed, and that's where it is most needed also coming from the government agencies.
What about you?
I think from what Brizza has mentioned as well, I just want to add that we also need to see the digital authoritarianism from the perspective of who can control and who have resources to control the digital realm. Because if we dig in some information, that we know that some ASEAN governments have invested a lot of money for social media advertisements, for buzzer,
yes.
for
that's the new battleground,
social media
yeah.
army, and that something that we as a society need to battle as well, because there is a war of narratives here that some of the ASEAN's government are trying to portray negative narratives against human rights defenders, against civil society. And then in addition to that as well, we also see the increase of the using digital attacks, such as hacking of website, hacking of personal social media accounts belonging to human rights defenders as well. And these cases have never been fully investigated, and then there is no accountability on that as well. So if we look at the trend on the digital authoritarianism, in addition to the existence of the repressive laws, as Brizza mentioned, there are also tactics that have been used and deployed against those very critical to democracy itself. And it's actually very concerning and emerging as well, because ASEAN is due to develop its digital master plan 2030, and it's a master plan of how ASEAN will embark or will embrace the agenda of digitalizations for the next 5 years until 2030.
Okay.
But big questions whether will it be a human rights based approach master plan, or will it be just serving the
security goals
who will be benefiting from
that is a fantastic point about whether or not civil society is ready to adapt to it. I'm curious to know if these tactics are being used against human rights defenders. Are CSOs in ASEAN adapting fast enough to deal with this digital terrain, this digital warfare, in terms of navigating disinformation or protecting themselves and their defenders online? Do you see that happening?
Yes, so of course navigating the digital security now is a paramount concern of civil society as well. That's why like lots of networks and consolidations are now being made among human rights civil society organizations and with those who are concerned about tech as well. So there are learning exchange that happen on how we can navigate this challenges together, basically.
Right. I see this as a wonderful opportunity for regeneration of activism in Southeast Asia, particularly because the battlegrounds have changed. The warfare tactics, the authoritarianism has changed. And I think young people are quick to recognize this. If I may come to you, Alexa, and ask you how you're seeing the landscape of activism and the defending of democracy in Southeast Asia. Has that changed, evolved? What forms is it taking amongst young people?
Yeah, I think that was also a big conversation yesterday in the Democracy and Political Rights cluster. But there are two, I guess, in terms of regenerations, there are regeneration of youth activism. There are like two sides of the debate. One, we're seeing youth disengagement. But on disengagement. But on the other hand, we're also seeing, of course, how we've seen in Thailand, in Myanmar, for instance, these are youth-led protests or youth-led movements. So there are like two sides of the game. So which one is it? But I think the more important conversation is how the youth are adapting to, you know, there are different contexts in Southeast Asia. For instance, in the Philippines, we don't have we're not seeing the same type of digital authoritarianism. We're sort of relatively free in terms of our digital space or our online space compared to our other Southeast Asian neighbors. But at the same time, the more important conversation is with all of these different contexts, how our different youth movements, youth organizations are adapting. So the young people are being more creative. For one, we're now seeing, aside from, you know, protests on the street, the traditional, you'd say, we're also seeing online activism or the use of digital technologies, creative ones, you know, trying to work around restrictive laws in respective countries, right? Because there are certain, in the Philippines, it's relatively free, but, you know, there are still cyber libel and disinformation and attacks and red tagging, as well as other Southeast Asian countries. But I think the more important conversation that we should be having, I mean, not now, but in the future, how do we sustain these youth movements? Because, you know, it's, at the cluster yesterday, I said that sometimes the conversation or the rallies loud in TikTok and online.
Is it almost performative? Is it? You want to make sure that it transfers from online to real life.
And these concerns are actually channeled to more important forum, right? How do we push young people not only to stop in making noise online or on the street, but also being able to consolidate this and bring it to a proper forum where this could be addressed.
Could I ask you about youth disengagement? How are you observing trends about that? Are young people disengaged because they feel disenfranchised, not part of the democratic process, or they don't have agency to create change? What are you observing, Alexa?
I don't think I could speak for other Southeast Asians, but in the Philippines, for instance, there is a national youth survey that was conducted in the Philippines ahead of the one of our last major elections, in the 2022 elections, and I shared it yesterday in the forum. More than half of Filipino youth said that they would not take part in protests. And would not do it or have not taken part in it. But at the same time, and this is very interesting, the more than half of the youth also said that they would want to take part in issue-based conversations. Okay. So I think that's the trend. So for instance, they would rather voice their opinions online, but would not rather do it. I think that would be the effect of how red tagging and also progressive youth are being subjected to surveillance and harassment in the Philippines. But at the same time, there is also high engagement among Filipino youth about how they would want to, how they think that it's their right to vote, how they think it's important for them to express their opinion, how they think that it's issues such as climate change, poverty, etc. All of these important issues are important issues that should be addressed. So I think, for our leaders and civil society as well, working for policy, the trick is how do you manage this? Yes. This sentiment among the youth, how you could work around so that you pull them out of their apathy, and and engage them, because there's already the interest there, but how they could channel and how they could perform and this interest.
Brizza, you've been in the civil society space for a while, and I want to ask you, I mean, not that long, I'm not saying anything, but enough to see maybe the duality of older and younger activists. Are they aligned in terms of goals and methods? Do you see a tension in the intergenerational? Is that within democratic movements, are generations aligned in how to achieve and the vision that they want to achieve?
With regard to vision, it's still aligned.
Okay.
I've been working with Alexa for the past 5 years because we came from same organization in the Philippines also. We are acknowledging the generation. When it comes to methodology, digital means is for the Gen Z right now. But millennials are keeping up, actually. Okay. But looking also from cross-regional perspective also, because Alexa talked about the perspective of the Philippines and at the same time, the perspective of different countries in Southeast Asia. But just to reiterate that sustaining it is very important, because looking at the South Asian region, we've seen what happened in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh. It hit them at the very bottom, wherein the basic needs for a people to survive cannot be given already. So something that the youth has led the protest, the movement, digital or even on the streets. So it came to a point that it's very, very sensitive to them. Okay. So I am hoping personally that it will not happen to Southeast Asia. Because what happened to South Asia, actually it illustrated a really big shift. Right. Because they are less willing to accept the status quo. So we are also following the what's happening in two countries, because they were able to oust their leaders. Yeah, the sitting leaders. Yes, the sitting leaders at that point. And we are following them because of the transition as well. Yeah. We've seen the elections in Sri Lanka on how the youth participated also in their elections. We are seeing the transition right now in Bangladesh. So that's something very relevant, that the Southeast Asia, in our region, we should take a moment to step back a little and see what's happening also in other regions, because it might also be relevant, because our economy is still surviving. But when our economy drops and it hit us, probably it will bring something different to the youth as well.
Now that's a fantastic point. We should definitely be watching for trends and see how it affects us. What is your hope for the future of democracy and political rights and civic space in ASEAN? Are you hopeful? Are you worried about these trends that we're seeing around the region that might spill over to us? Could I ask you what you hope for the future of democracy, ideally, but also realistically? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hanung. Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think for me, representing a regional civil society organization with 90 members in 25 countries, we have always seen that struggle for democracy has never been a constant way. It's always a fluctuate situation. So challenge will be there, challenge will be amplified, but it doesn't mean that we have to deter ourselves to not consolidating with each other, not to empowering each other through intergenerational exchange, through cross-country exchange or cross-regional exchange that Brizza has mentioned as well, because I think there's something that we can learn from one another to defend and to enhance the democracy itself, and it can also contribute to the betterment of the democracy and political rights in ASEAN. So it should not be, or let us not allow that democracy and political rights be determined by how those who are in power determine it. But we as civil society needs to also take an active role with civil society, citizens, journalists, and so on and so forth, to play an active role on defending democracy and to shape the democracy that we want.
Yeah, which is why it was so encouraging for me as someone outside of the space, but just watching, it was so encouraging to see the ASEAN Peoples Forum, to see 500 over activists and civil society groups converge and talk about issues about regional democracy and, help each other. And sometimes I think maybe within this space you feel alone, but having everyone else this kind of grouping, it actually really boosts morale, and I'm sure it was an injection of energy for civil society groups. Alexa, can I ask you, you mentioned at the start of our conversation, you said it's important for us to look at some of the concrete solutions or concrete things to do to move forward to strengthen democracy in this part of the world. What were you referring to? And can I get you to share a little bit with us?
Well, I think, drawing from our experience in the Philippines, as well as the work of my organization, we're really into reforms. And I think that's also a component in civil society work that could be further strengthened, channeling, after all of the roundtables and the discussions are done, what happens next? What happens next, right? And what are the actual steps that you would do? So, but also at the same time, just relating it to your what you asked, Hanung. I think the common thread in the conversation yesterday is like, in some ways we're concerned of what's happening in our other Southeast Asian neighbors might happen to us, but at the same time we're also cautiously optimistic because, for instance, in the Philippines or in Indonesia, for instance, in Malaysia, civil society is much alive, at least, or our civil society is able to break into and engage with formal mechanisms and formal institutions.
So not so much on the kind of sideline.
Yes, not so much, and with, because we have our friends from Bercy, for instance, and Perludem, for instance. So yeah, but in terms of concrete reforms, at my organization, we always advocate for don't be allergic with working with your legislators, for instance, or with your government officials, or with the bureaucracy, because we are firm believers that you'll have, you'll find champions there. You'll find champions there, and you can work with them. But it's very important also to, as civil society, to know what are your non-negotiables. So you don't always get everything that you want.
It's a compromise.
Yeah, I know. But at least it's important. It's important to be very clear about what you want. That these are the bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4 that should be passed, should be talked about, and that's how this is how you work with, because it's very easy, for instance, to say that you're out in the streets protesting. It's very important. You make a noise, you make your issues known, but what happens after the dust set?
Yes, that's very, very important. And so my last question will probably be to you, Brizza. Your view, your hope for the future of democracy in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. What are you seeing in terms of the future? If I got you back on the show a year from today,
yes, of course.
what would you say?
No, actually, it's more of a commitment coming from the civil society organization. We shall remain hopeful, but at the same time, we should also amplify our voice that democracy should not be taken for granted. Because right now, our opportunity is on how to protect the democratic institutions and uphold the rule of law. because that's the main tactic being as a trend across Southeast Asia, that you are using the you are doing it in a very legal way, legal means. So somehow, how do you accept it as a status quo? So that is where the civil society organizations are coming from. We are citizen observers working for elections, and citizen observers are basically human rights defenders also. And we are on the verge, and we are on an important point right now on how to better protect the democratic institutions, because that's the way how to best survive this kind of democracy, which is ever evolving.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, all three of you, for being on the show with me today, sharing some of your insights and also the work that you do. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.